All right. Welcome to Diverse Joy, a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into diversity discussions.
Yay.
My co-host is the amazing Ankara dress wearing Dr. Amber Nelson.
Hi. Hello. And my co-host is Dr. William Cox, who is wearing Black History Month colors, which, if you are unfamiliar, are black, red, green, and yellow.
Yes.
He's also wearing a Sojourner Truth t-shirt.
I love
Yes.
Truth.
Yes.
All right, and today we have a very special guest, my friend Bernie Hose.
Hello,
He's
everybody.
been an English teacher for over 30 years, and he's very involved in the community in and around Madison, Wisconsin, where he and I both live. He's the past board chair for G-Safe, which is an organization that works with LGBT plus kids in schools across the state. He's the past president for Community Shares, past vice president for Briar Patch Youth Services. Also, for those of you who can't see him, he is a black man and he is a black gay man as well, which may come up in some of what we talk about.
I'm the current vice president for Briar Patch.
Oh, current vice president. Excuse me, Mr. Vice President.
Right. I'm trying to say something, y'all.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but because it's Black History Month, we were going to talk a bit about kind of living history and experiences, especially that Amber and Bernie have experienced throughout their lives. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Bernie. You want to share a bit with us?
Well, before we start that, maybe our joys. We always like to start off by talking about our joy.
I don't even know how my own podcast works.
Before we totally turn it over to
I'm
you.
excited. I'm excited.
I'm going to direct us.
Well, thank you. All right. Hey, I was ready to roll with it.
We've only done this like 20-some
Only
times.
a few times.
Season and a half.
First time with me, though.
So,
There you go.
you dazzled me.
thank
and
you.
I forgot myself.
Yeah.
Yes,
All right.
welcome.
Bernie. So, Bernie, what's bringing you joy?
I've been reflecting on this, and what has been bringing me joy as of late is the fellowship and community that I have with my friends.
That's so good.
Wonderful.
And because we're all so busy, we're teaching, doing our jobs, doing what it is that we have to do to get through life. That's a bit heavy, but to get through the day.
For
But
sure.
for me, that Friday when we all start planning, because we're old and boring, we start planning on Wednesday. But by Friday, we all know we're going to meet. And it's so great to have us all together and sharing stories about the week, laughing about the week, laughing at each other, enjoying just the company. So that is what's bringing me joy.
I love that.
Yeah,
I talk a lot about like the sharing space and the community
Yes.
and how important that is. And I think it's important for everybody. And also I think particularly as BIPOC folks, like that community, whether they're your chosen family, like we've talked about before, or there are other BIPOC folks that the need to just have that community around you is so important.
So important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it kind of relates to my joy, which is Portland. I'm from Portland, Oregon. And it is, and I've shared before on this podcast, like it's a very white space. But they have what's called My People's Market. And it's a market. I love Saturday markets. I love going art fairs, things like that, and being able to get, products that are handmade and things that are made from folks in my community and small businesses. And the My People's Market in Portland is a market specifically for BIPOC, like artists and vendors. And it is a place, even if you don't know anybody, that you feel that sense of community. Because again, all the vendors are BIPOC, and being able to see those businesses, be able to support them, support their business, and to have community with one another is such a special place. And they even have a stage where they bring in expressive arts that are different cultures, right? Like we had hula, and we had, they've done step, and they've done all types of different type of spoken word and different things like that. That is just a great experience. And again, it's just an opportunity for community to happen, even with people that you don't know, right? And in a space that doesn't naturally have those places, particularly for BIPOC folks. So that is, I really have enjoyed that in Portland.
Connection too.
Yes, absolutely. That sense of connection. Yeah. Cool. Well, how about you? What's your joy?
What's bringing me joy? joy lately? So recently, there was this event that came through town called the Edgar Allan Poe Speakeasy.
Yeah, I read about that.
Yeah, and I went with a few of my friends, and it was really great. So they did 4 of Edgar Allan Poe's pieces, and there was an actor up on the stage reciting it, acting it out, and with each one they had a cocktail paired with it.
That's so fun.
So that was fun.
Wisconsin girl.
Yeah. and it was just a great event, kind of getting in touch with literature, something that, me and the friends who were there, we were talking, I haven't read some of this stuff since high school,
Right.
but we still remembered it and remember the emotional connection it had.
Yeah.
And also in the realm of kind of thinking of diversity and joy, it was really great for representation. I believe half of the actors were BIPOC. And that's not what you expect with like Edgar Allan Poe. You imagine the kind of like gothic, very white person with dark hair kind of thing. But also they really intelligently put modern spins on things. So even though it's older language, figuring out how to say it in a kind of modern way or put a little humor in it that we would get was just to hit it.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And we dressed up. I wore a giant top hat.
I love it.
We'll maybe stick pictures of that in the video version. But yeah, that brought me a
cool.
bunch of joy.
That's really cool.
I'd like to add something that's bringing me joy right now.
Yes.
Is the cool glasses that both of you are wearing.
We should make our glasses joy at some point. I like to have fun glasses.
Yeah.
Great glasses.
Yeah. Well,
I'm sorry.
No, yes,
that's
please.
great.
Thank you. And I have to say, I have to thank her for this because she's definitely been a big inspiration.
All right.
Yeah. So I jumped the gun earlier, but we're going to talk about kind of lived history and living history, especially related to Black experiences. And, it was the 3 of us, we always have a little planning meeting for every episode. And man, it was hard to stop these 2 from just gushing with amazing stories.
Yeah,
I was like, don't use them up. You want to do them on camera, on recording. So yeah, we wanted to kind of start with the guest. Bernie,
thank you.
You were sharing some stories. And
thank you. And as we think about Black History Month, I just recently had the joy of crossing over to age 61.
Congratulations.
Yay.
That is
the 60 is so far. Well, the 2 1 year.
Yeah.
It's fun so far. But, I was reflecting on like Black history and then thinking about living Black history and living Black present and Black future for how long I'm going to be here. But, I'm just thinking about like growing up in Baltimore, which, a lot of people don't think of Baltimore as the South, but it is.
It is.
Below the Mason-Dixon line.
Below the Mason-Dixon line.
That's true. And just a little sidebar, Edgar Allan Poe did live in Baltimore.
I was going to say, Edgar Allan Poe is a big thing in Baltimore.
Totally big thing, yeah.
Yep.
So maybe that's why all the actors of color, from Baltimore.
Could have been.
But, thinking about history, there's 2 things that come to mind as I reflected on this. When MLK was, assassinated, I was 5 years old. And I just remember playing with toys, and I remember because at that time I was living with my grandmother and grandfather. I remember thinking that it was Abraham Lincoln because we as a child as a Black child we learned right away about Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves.
Yeah.
We learn more as we grow older and go to college.
Of course.
Yeah,
right.
But and my 5-year-old, that's what I was thinking. I was like, wait. Abraham Lincoln, he got shot. I was just thinking about that. And in that same time frame, I recall going to downtown Baltimore with my mom to the major department store, and we always ate in the basement at the little lunch counter. And I love the turkey club. So this day I love turkey clubs. But, as I got older and realized, 1967 Baltimore. Right. That was where
segregated,
where people of color ate, And then, can I share one more?
Absolutely.
Okay,
many more.
Yeah, this is the last one.
No,
just living, but it's living Black history, but also how time changes and just the advancement, not advancement, but how the African American community has progressed and shifted in that one of my best friends from high school, long story short, my mom was an elevator girl in the 50s. People were like, elevator girl? I'm like, people would get on the elevator and be like, 6th floor.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So that was her job when she was in college. And moved to 1977. I'm going to a Catholic school, and one of my best friends, who I became best friends with, his father was my mother's boss in the 50s.
Wow.
And, it was just really funny to see both their reactions because they saw each other.
Right.
My mom was dropping me off, being the dutiful mother. Bye, Mom.
Yeah.
I'm going to go hang with my friend Scott. And, his father saw her and they saw each other.
Yeah.
And, at this time it didn't register, but they both looked at each other.
Right.
But there was no like, hey, girl. Oh, hey. None of that. It was just like, I know you.
Yeah.
And, after that, my mom shared with me how he was my boss when I worked in the elevator. He was a SOB.
Right.
And I've never shared this with my friend, but that's just, that part of like living that history.
100%.
So,
well, being an elevator girl at the time in the 50s and 60s, I can imagine what it was like to have likely a white boss, it sounds like, right? And in that space and that knowing look of more acknowledging that there's knowing here. Right. But then I also imagine that there were feels on both sides of our kids are now going to school together. Yes. Right? Of like, what is that for him to know that his employee or subordinate's child was going to school with his child. Yeah. And then also for your mom, right? Of what was it like for her to be able to like see her child go to school at the same time and space as his,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks for letting me share that.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, and I've shared on the pod before, but Baltimore has a very special place in my heart and a very special, I have a very special relationship with my own identity and identity as a Black woman in relation to Baltimore because I grew up in Oregon, predominantly in Oregon, in a very white space. I learned who I was, what my identity was, very much through a white lens, because that's always what was reflected back to me, right? So I knew I identified as Black and biracial, but it was always mitigated by the white mirror that I had back to me, what I was supposed to be like, how it was supposed to be, on both sides, right? Of like being like using code switching and things, but also this like I'm supposed to be tough and like a thuggy, like this thing that like is so not who I am or my personality at all. But there was a time in my life where I thought I was like, I don't know, a thug? I don't know. Like it was very short.
Well,
lived,
it's the stereotypes become norms.
Right.
We think that you should be
exactly
what the stereotype says.
And like the people, and I loved the people that I grew up with, and I still do. And I think that part of that was just like they had also lack of exposure. So the ways in which they perceived me were often through their media portrayals and antiquated colloquialisms, right? And so I grew up in this space where I was constantly like figuring that out. My mom, let me just shout her out that like raising us in a white space, she also really worked very, very hard to make sure that we were connected with our culture, that we understood who we were. She worked very, very hard. And it wasn't love you, Mom. But it wasn't until I moved away and I was I was finishing my doctorate. So I was 30 years old. The first time I lived and was in a place that was predominantly Black.
Yeah, Chocolate City.
Baltimore. I had never, maybe intermittently and went down to Southern California. I'm originally from Southern California. So I've been in BIPOC spaces before, but I hadn't lived in a place where most of the people looked like me. And it was the first time that I realized like, oh my God, I didn't even talk in my real voice. Like I talked in a way that made other people feel comfortable. And not to like draw attention to my difference or to be different Black than what they're expecting or whatever that is. And it wasn't until I moved to Baltimore that all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can dress however I want to. I can go to the store in my bonnet and my slippers and nobody's gonna care because I'm not the only one that looks like me, right? Like I get to go and be Amber and not just a Black woman.
Right.
And in Oregon and in the spaces that I've been in, predominantly been in, I was always Black woman first, not Amber first, and in Baltimore, it was the place where I got to be an individual because there are so many folks that look like me. And so it's a very, like for me in my own personal Black history, in my own space and understanding who I am and my identity, Baltimore holds that very, very special home for me. Yeah. So nice. Yeah. And I also can see like living there in, the 2020s that like, well, I guess late 2010s, that also seeing the very segregated, right? Like there are very different Baltimores that are even saying Baltimore, right? Like there's Balmer and there's Baltimore. Those are two different experiences of the same area in the same space.
Yeah. It is fascinating to me now that I reflect on Baltimore is very segregated and to this day it still is. It's sad, but it's just the way that city has grown. But it also has a very comfortable Black middle class that I feel that even with living here in Madison, you just don't see that. And there's just, like you said, it's just exposure, just, Yeah, it's fascinating.
It really is. And again, it's that space where you get to see Black folks living the gamut, right? The CEO to the person on the street to, everybody in between. And I feel like in a lot of spaces that aren't, Chocolate City, that aren't like have a very large Black demographic, you don't always get to see that. It reinforces a very single story, single narrative, because we see one or two, like we become really two-dimensional in a lot of spaces because we don't have the same level of exposure and representation.
Yeah.
And the kind of income range, so bring in some science and data for just a moment. The income range is so crucial because across the U.S., there's a heavy skew among the Black community towards being more on the lower SES end. And so when you're in spaces, for instance, Madison, where there are far fewer Black people than the national average, it means almost all of them are very poor. And so when you look at statistics like related to discrepancies, they get much bigger because of that kind of data skew. You have to have a larger proportion of Black folks to be able to have that
see
range.
The spread.
If it's a smaller group, it's almost all exclusively very low SES.
But there is a large Black middle class in Madison.
Relative to other places. Relative to Baltimore.
It's too small.
I wasn't saying they don't exist. It's relative to other places. We're a very white city.
Am I allowed to call the area out?
If you may. If you want to.
Like Fitchburg. That's where my friends.
Is that where?
Yeah, we always laugh about that. That's
that.
where the Black
middle and
upper middle class in Madison, they all live in
Fitchburg.
Fitchburg.
I didn't know
Fitchburg.
that.
Yeah.
All right.
Because, we talked to someone and we're like, so blah, blah, blah. So where do you live? Oh, I'm on the west side. Fitchburg. But it's great. It's great. But it's just that if you're in the community,
you know.
So
it's a signal. It's a signal.
You brought up something.
I apologize. Our producers, we were saying SES. That is short for socioeconomic status. Income is often how people talk class, social class.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but go ahead.
Well, but I think what you Amber, when you were talking about coming from that space out west and then to Baltimore, I think that sometimes because we're BIPOC, we're so limited in our identity. Like, I feel like sometimes we're either this or that.
Right.
Or society inflicts that on you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. But, I also remember as a child growing up, my grandmother was emphatic that I had a male figure in my life, because I just wasn't masculine enough. And that's also very prevalent in our community. It's very
100%.
Yes, you gotta represent. And it was just, just fascinating. Just
Absolutely.
even within the culture. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I know we'll probably talk about this a little bit later about expectations within and outside of our community and how we're supposed to interact, how we're supposed to act, behave, what it looks like for us as well. And both, I think that there's an imposition on us externally around that 2D kind of two-dimensional kind of portrayal of who we are. But I think that sometimes it can be perpetuated internally as well. Like what Black people do and don't do, and like what's white and what's, like you can't do that. That's white. Like you just, what are you talking about? Like,
she talk white, girl.
Right.
She talk white.
And so there's and for me as a biracial person, like always living in that in between too. Of like I was never Black enough, I was never white enough. I was always this in between and trying to figure out like how do I be more of one or the other. But even outside of being biracial, I think we do that to ourselves and within our community a lot too. Absolutely.
Oh, go ahead.
No. The tyranny of categories is just a term some people use for that.
I love that, tyranny of categories. So I recently belonged to this organization. It's an organization of Black men. And it was really, I had to come to terms with myself as a Black gay man. This organization is, all Black men. And I knew I wanted to be a member of this organization, but I also had fear because, I'm a out Black gay man. I'm comfortable, and I hate to say I'm comfortable, and like I'm just who I am.
With yourself. You know who you are.
But also because this organization is doing a lot of things in the community. So it was really fascinating to me that when I had the conversation with the president, of the organization, I said, look, I'm an out Black gay man. And I love what he said. He goes, we don't have time for that. We've got way too much going on in this city.
We're not going to be focused on that.
Right. But it is still there. You still feel it. I still feel it because I'm in a room and, I'm outwardly straight Black men. Yeah. Girl, we never know.
Right. But public facing.
Public facing. But, I'm also very aware, and I see like, everyone's very aware of like their masculinity, and we joke and we laugh about it. And, and then, as being a co-chair of the membership committee, I still take my space and stand up and be, I'm not dancing around as a gay man, but I'm just saying like, I'm just myself.
Right.
No.
Absolutely.
And I think because when you were talking about that, there's all these expectations. These categories. What was the term you used?
Tyranny of categories.
Right. Like where are you going to fit?
Yep.
And then that is what you're going to present.
Yeah.
And so,
And I talk a lot about like, being Black is not a monolith, right? Like there's so many ways, and any culture or any identity is not a monolith. There's so many ways of being Black and being this, and yet there's still there's one internal fear. There's still these things that kind of hold us to certain expectations, or like, Black people don't go outside, they don't camp, they don't do these things, they don't do
they don't do cosplay,
they don't go to the Ren Fair. They don't do these things, and I think again we were talking about the kids these days earlier, but I do believe that like I think our new generation is starting to push us to see that we can be more than one thing, that we can be more than that expectation. Yeah,
and we're gonna go on break. So this is circling back a little, but it just occurred to me, Amber, how opposite our kind of experiences were. So I think listeners already know, but I'm a very white appearing person from a mixed family, but not Black. It's Asian, Hawaiian, and Puerto Rican. But growing up in a military family, I was very often one of the only white kids in a lot of kids of color. In fact, of my 3 high schools, so I went to 3 different high schools. 2 of them were majority Black. My graduating class, I was one of only 3 Black people. Wow. And the this idea of Blackness being a monolith, like for me, that was never my experience because it was more important whether you were a nerd versus a jock. And, me and the other nerds, there were black nerds and so on. And so especially going into college and learning more about kind of racial bias and stuff when I started learning about it, I was like, oh, that wasn't, I get these stereotypes and things, but that wasn't really my experience the same way. And so it's just, I'm sure informs why I do this work.
For sure. One, and it also informs why I do this work, right? Because, a lot of my work is bringing diversity and training in white spaces and also being that representation for kids and young adults and adults that look like me in those spaces.
I was going to say that.
And feeling like, I think at one point I wanted to go to an HBCU when I was growing up. And I was like, well, I won't fit in. No. I won't fit in.
I felt that way too.
I won't fit in. So I can't. I could never do that. I could never.
I got accepted to Howard for my PhD.
Yeah.
And it was, I was like that experience and going there, but I was also accepted here and I ultimately came here. But yeah, but it's interesting, right? That you felt more comfortable applying and going to Howard than I did. Right. Yeah, and I was going there to study prejudice and bias and all this stuff, and I'm and I saw that as part of what the education would be too. Also, so
And also HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, for those of you who are unfamiliar.
And Roman just said, I said I was one of 3 Black kids who graduated. I was one of only 3 white kids in my graduating class.
There we go.
Right. Awesome. So
we got you though.
You understood.
We were picking up what you were saying.
We were with you. Awesome. So we had a few more things that maybe we thought we'd talk about. Amber, did you want to share some of that stuff related to the history of Portland?
Yeah. So first I want to make it really clear I'm not an expert on the history of Portland.
Sure. Of course not.
But the history of Portland is a very anti-Black, anti-anything state. And so while earlier you were asking, Bernie was asking, well, it was a sundown state. And I was like, well, technically not a sundown state, meaning sundown, like if after the sun sets, like a person of color cannot be out because there would be repercussions of being out.
A lot of stuff from the American South. Sundown counties is often how you might hear about it.
States, counties.
At sundown, the people of color, often who were there working during the day, had to be out and back in the segregated.
Yep. And so technically Oregon was not a sundown state, but it was really created as a white utopia. And so it was anti-Black, and there was a lot of anti and exclusionary laws for Chinese, Black specifically in that area. And so, there's, I'm going to shout out Walidah, Walidah, I can't remember her last name, but we'll find it. She does a ton about like, why is Oregon so white? Why are there no Black people in Oregon? And she goes through the whole history and all of the laws and things like that. But we see this still remnants in Portland and in Oregon on the whole, is that it's a very white state, right? And then in Portland, it was the space where most Black folks and BIPOC kind of congregate and had the largest community in Oregon. And over the last few years or decade or so, we've seen a lot of gentrification happening, and gentrification's happening all over the country, meaning, majority culture folks kind of moving in to urbanize or bring opportunities, but they're taking advantage of small businesses. They're buying them out and they're pushing them out of the spaces and then pricing the community out of their own community.
Exactly.
And so we're seeing, in Portland, where there were areas where we really had strong Black communities have now been disbanded and pushed out into other spaces. So like one thing was like the building of I-5, which is Interstate 5, goes all down the northwest and actually all the way through down California.
Yes.
And so that was built right in the middle of Black communities. The dams that were built to keep the water out of one of the largest and most prolific Black neighborhoods, Vanport, were not kept up to code and flooded the neighborhoods. And now we're seeing a lot of the Black community, especially our older folks that have been born, raised, and grown up in the area, have now been pushed further and further out into areas like Gresham and spots further out of Portland. So we still have neighborhoods, but there's fewer neighborhoods that are just like Black neighborhoods. So like in a lot of spaces, and I would imagine here too, you can tell me, you mentioned Fitchburg as kind of a community. Like we have very few places where, like I can go to this neighborhood and this is a Black neighborhood. Like MLK used to be a Black neighborhood, and there's still like, hair stores, beauty shops that are there. But it's still not a predominantly Black space. The neighborhood's not the same.
Right.
And so, it's a big part of kind of the composite there. And it's been really interesting moving back again, because I grew up in that space. Right. So it was my understanding of what normal was until I was out of that space and realizing, this isn't normal, right?
I didn't think about that.
Right.
Baltimore.
Right, exactly. It was a huge culture shock, but moving back into that space and then ushering in or welcoming Black folks or people of color that do not grow up in that space and giving them that education around like what it actually means to live in a place like this. And they're like, oh no, I'm used to predominantly white spaces. Like, yeah, but you're used to predominantly white spaces where you can still access communities of Black folks. And here is much more difficult to do. You have to be extremely intentional to like build that sense of community, because you can't just go to the corner store and find your people in the same
church.
way. And we have some Black churches, but those are dwindling. They're getting smaller. It just doesn't look the same, which I think is a larger conversation around what Black churches look like on the whole right now. Oh, but in particular in this area, we really we continue to see the kind of diminishing neighborhoods and culture and space. Right. In fact, one of my students and I are speaking at, or spoke at this point, at APA conference around, American Psychological Conference, Association Conference, about some of the efforts and research that we're doing. Mine being working with Black youth in Oregon, particularly rural Oregon. And she works with Black elders in Portland, Oregon, and doing a lot of research around like nostalgia-based interventions to help with memory and going through and walking through the neighborhoods as they've shifted and changed, but like letting them tell the stories of like, this is what this building used to be. This is who's been here. This is what this means. And it's a really great intervention for like memory and things like that, but like giving them a sense
oral
of
history,
right? So it's a retaining, exactly. It's retaining the history of the Black Portlands, trying to kind of reestablish that and maintaining it, but also helping them with their own cognitive abilities and things as well.
Have you thought of kind of connecting your group and her group, like the elders with your kiddos?
Yeah, we haven't explicitly talked about that, but we should. We should be doing that, because her group that Thrive, like it would be really great. And my program's a mentorship program where we kind of have a graduated olders kind of mentor youngers, but it'd be really great to bring in seniors to be mentoring the younger folk as well.
Oh my word.
Yeah, it's huge. But as I was thinking about this and thinking about like Black history and something else we talked about earlier, and especially in our spaces, and you do academics, right? And what does it mean for us to, what does it mean to celebrate, I think, Black history for us? Or what is February like for you in celebrating that in your spaces, in your life?
I gotta think about that one.
Yeah.
What does it mean for me in terms of Black History Month and my space that, or that occupy, where I live, work, socialize. I really feel that it is important for me to let folk know that, February is the Identify Black History Month. But to me, Black history, as I've said before, lives through me, lives around me.
Yep.
In the organizations that I work with. Because I feel like Black culture is so deeply ingrained into this country. When I think about even like my ancestors and your ancestors, when we all helped create this country and this I can't think of what's what I'm thinking about, but how we live.
The fabric of our society.
The fabric of our society. So when I think about Black history, I'm going to say the joy side of it is I love all the specials that you'll see on PBS. And Skip Gates and all of that stuff comes to the forefront. And I love all that because it is a celebration of my history, of our history, of our past and our present and future. So I love that because it's sort of like, ooh.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But I also, it's very important to me that, come February 28th, it doesn't go away.
End.
Yeah, it's
both and.
Right.
Yeah. Both it is Black History Month and it is all history.
Yeah. Well, I talk a lot about American history is Black history, right? That every day is Black history, and that we are living embodiments. So you started this off kind of talking about the living history. We are living embodiments of not only going through really, really monumental times in Black history for you, some of that civil rights movement, MLK, current, post George Floyd and BLM and all of those things that not only have we and are we living in, but we are also contributing to, we are the embodiment of, There's I think it's a quote or t-shirt or whatever, like I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, right? Like I am I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I am the living embodiment of what Black history is, the past, present, and future of Black history. I'm standing on the shoulders of my ancestors, but also I am the building blocks for the future generations.
Well, you bring. I'm sorry a minute.
No, you're good.
But you just put it something I thought about, and when we think about Black History Month as educators, as Black educators at predominantly white institutions, we've all been in the classrooms where you're the first person of color they've had in their 12 years.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're just like,
what? Yeah. Right.
And wait, don't you love hip hop? And don't you know all these things that, those categories of that term that what was it again?
Tyranny of categories.
All of that, gets applied. But we also are in a position of where we can say, no, this is who I am. I'm your teacher. And I'm going to guide you to what it is, the next path that you have. And to me, that is also an example of a Black history that, like you said, the people who came before us worked hard so that we could be standing in the classroom and be the only person of color in that classroom. To me, that's also an aspect of Black history, of African-American history.
Yeah.
So...
Absolutely. Yeah, I think about that a lot in my positions in academia, right? Of who am I? And I think when I first stepped in, I had a lot of pressure on myself of like, I came here so that I could be representation. So I need to be the blackest black person ever. Yeah. And I'm like, well, but like, what does that even mean? What does that look like? And what does it mean for me to just exist, right? Me existing is the representation. Me being at the forefront of the room. My students of color, my marginalized students, my white students, being able to see me in that position.
Exactly.
I am doctor.
Yep.
I am your faculty. I'm your professor.
Right.
Like I am the person who is imparting knowledge. And just that in and of itself, again, is history, is monumental, is representation without me and putting anything else on top of that. Yep. And yet, I think in February, one of the things I often feel the pressure of like having to do extra work, having to do extra work of educating and like, how do I bring more awareness and knowledge and more things around Black history because it's Black History Month and I'm Black and therefore I have to do all of this work. Right. And I sit in this tension a lot of, but I am Black again. Like I said, I am Black history. And this is a month about celebrating me and my ancestors. Right. And I don't want to do more labor. Right. Like, so even when it was my job as the director of diversity to do education, to do these things, I often found myself stepping back more in February of like, let me celebrate myself.
Exactly.
Like it's like that, who is it? Is it Snoop Dogg that says like, first of all, I want to thank me. Right? Like, there's that meme.
Niecy Nash did that recently in her awards. I want to thank me. I loved it.
Yeah. You know, like I want to thank me. But like taking that moment of saying like, okay, instead of me doing more labor, pressing in more, giving more, it was Snoop Dogg. Yeah, there's a meme that's going around that's like, first of all, I want to thank me. But yeah, like I want to take this month and instead of doing more work and putting more pressure on myself to step back and actually let myself rest and be and allow my existence in spaces, particularly predominantly white spaces, to be something that is, you know, representation, is teaching, is all of those things.
And that's an experience I hear a lot from Black folks, and we've been talking about it, and it makes me kind of wonder and compare it to, say, LGBT Pride Month. Right. Like, would it be different if it were Black Pride? Because I never feel an obligation during Pride Month. I'm like, woohoo, this month is about me. And so is it a framing thing? Is it because of kind of historical context? I think
it's a good question. I think that I don't know how you feel, but one of the things that I often feel the pressure to be teaching all the time. Right? Like we're always in that position, like, or not, let me just say like particularly predominantly white spaces or places where we are the minority or minoritized. Often there's this pressure to be speaking on behalf of Black culture.
Right. The tokenism.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think like Black History Month is like this time where white folks or majority culture folks or other folks are like, all right, well, I'm ready to learn about Black history. So what are you going to teach me today? Right? So it's like it feels maybe a little bit more explicit. I don't know. I don't know if
perhaps
you
the
feel
attitude
that.
of the white people towards the month that maybe straight people don't have towards Gay Pride Month.
Right.
Or,
well, it's interesting because I'm just thinking of that flip side. You always see like this Black History Month, yay, and then someone's like, well, what about Irish history?
Right, what about White History Month?
White History Month.
Yeah.
It's just, and you know, I love when someone will say that. I'm like, okay, we're already celebrating white history.
Right.
Like every day.
Yeah.
I turn on the TV, you know, it's there. It's being celebrated.
Yeah.
I had another thought. Oh, that's it. Speaking of joy, but I really would like to get your two opinion on this one because this happened in my place of employment. And, you know, we were going through this, having this talk, and this person said, I'm just curious what you all think of this comment. I just want you to know that I'm an expert on diversity.
Oh.
And I was like, what?
Oh, wow.
What does that mean?
Oh, so in our first season, our tagline for this podcast was we are so-called experts. And every episode we emphasize, because there's no such thing as an expert. It is constantly learning. There are new things we are figuring out.
And the second you start to call yourself that
expert.
You
The work is, you sound like the work is
learning.
done.
You know everything that there is to know,
Right.
and therefore every person you've met,
Right.
like then you know every type of Black person,
Right.
you know every
It's
type
just
of it. Like, hold on, wait a minute, yeah.
This is fascinating to me.
So I definitely have a very strong reaction to that.
It was just- and the reason the conversation was because we were about to have a hiring committee, and we wanted to make sure we have diverse candidates and blah blah blah. But this person was
Why did they need to tell you that? Why were you?
Right.
Were you?
no, but it was
Yeah.
myself and other people in the committee.
Yeah.
But this person, was from an area of this institution, would had to let us know that
I'm an expert.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
an
just
expert
like-
on this.
Right.
Wow.
Well, I don't know why I thought of that, but I was just thinking about when we think about Black History Month, and then again, as a Black person, this is like our month to educate.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Then
Yeah.
the March. What?
Yeah.
What? Who? Yeah.
Right.
So-
It is interesting though and I don't know what that's about. I think that that's something to sit with a little bit about. Why do maybe we or a lot of folks, and maybe it's because we're in education, I don't know.
True.
But like this heightened need to like perform or educate or train during the month of February when other
Right.
times,
Like,
not
why
that we
can't
don't
it be a
feel
pride,
that.
just a celebration?
Right.
But Black history and culture and Blackness.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know what that's about, but it's something to sit with.
It
So
is.
let me get your opinion on something, and my role in maybe perpetuating some of this. So a few years back. So what I do, Bernie, is I think you kind of know. I mean, I do this public speaking and trainings related
Right.
to bias, diversity of all kinds. A group asked me to come and speak on Martin Luther King Day for their Black History Month event, and I was open to it at first, but I was like, Are you sure you want me?
Right.
Like this
Right.
is what I do. This is my bread and butter.
Right.
But I'm like, I feel like it's about elevating Black voices,
Right.
which
Right.
is central to everything that I value and I try to do. But like this training, it'll have a lot of things related to anti-Black race bias and stuff. It's
Right.
not really about history though.
Right.
I feel like for Black History Month, it's amplifying Black voices and bringing in a white speaker. Might not be the way to go. But then now I'm also thinking, but then was that me kind of not stepping up and doing some of the work, and so then it fell to a Black person?
Well, that's what I was
think
thinking. Like,
there's-
who's the audience?
Right.
I forget at this point. But it was, their goal was, it's Black History Month. We want to do something related
Diversity related.
and
It is a good question. I think I sit with that a lot too around, when majority culture folks that do the work don't, then is that putting the labor on Black folks to like step in and do that.
Right.
And again, it is the both and, I'm all
all
about
about both
and.
and.
I'm all about
I love
both and. That the other side of that is that it is a time to amplify, not only amplify voices, but pour money into, right? Like compensate somebody a Black person to come and give that speech and give that, how do we do
I
that
didn't step
amplification?
back. I gave them advice. I was like, you might, you're thinking about this. It's great that you're working on a is this about amplifying Black voices? You might want to seek. So it wasn't I didn't say I wouldn't do it or anything.
Right.
So it was, what's the goal? And I think hopefully they then amplified a Black voice for that spot.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. Yeah.
I feel like though the term you're using, majority culture, would relate to you having this conversation, because I feel like if I came in and had the same talk, there would be like this sense to be like, oh, you're just trying to make me feel bad, or they're going to be, they're going to be on the defense.
100%.
Whereas, they're going to look at you and see how you're presenting, and then say like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
This is it's central. So Amber's been through my trainings and talks many times. I don't share my identities until the end. Anything about being gay, my racial, cultural background. And it's because there's all this science that says people will take things more seriously. They'll take race bias more seriously if it's a white person bringing it up.
Right.
They'll take all forms of bias. And so I'm trying to use that to help make change.
So
I had an additional thought on it.
Okay, go.
Please.
Well, and you know, I 100% agree, right? And one, we see that it's reinforced through literature, and research shows that, and you know, experience it. Like as somebody who taught diversity courses and was the director of diversity and things like that, that the conversation around diversity, when I am holding it, it doesn't matter often what I'm saying. Like I had a whole Diversity 1 course where, not that we never talked about race, but technically it wasn't one of the topics in the class, right? Like we talked about power and privilege. We talked about a lot of other things. Yeah. But race and racism wasn't technically a topic, right?
Right.
And yet, what was being projected onto me, what people were hearing out of but because it was coming from my mouth, there were all of these other things projected onto me, projected onto my values, projected onto my political affiliations, projected onto all of the things, whether I was explicitly or implicit or not saying anything. How they were accepting or not accepting what I was saying was changed. When I had somebody else who was a white presenting cishet man who came into the class and said something very similar or even stronger than I did, all of a sudden they were able to do it. Whereas I had to be Simone Biles out here and do all the verbal gymnastics, all the verbal gymnastics in order to get my point across so that it could be accepted and not shrouded with all these other like perceptions or thoughts that I was trying to like push a specific agenda when I'm just making statements around like all people. I'm not even saying black and white. It's an easy go-to, but I'm not even bringing that up, but you're putting that on me because it's coming out of my black ass mouth. Excuse me, my black mouth. Right? Excuse me, my bad.
I'm fine with it. But you said we weren't cussing on the podcast.
I know, my bad. I'm sorry.
I cuss all the time, but Amber said profanity free when we started this project.
My bad. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Well, it's good.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. What's your next topic?
It kind of reminds me of speaking of that. Well, and you were going to ask about your area of expertise.
Bernie, you teach composition.
I'm a composition teacher. I know that's. Can I just say that? I always think about it when people say, "What do you do?" I teach English, but I'm not like literature. I'm composition. My degree's in composition and rhetoric.
And how we communicate to others, how we're able to tell our stories is so important. One, and especially in this kind of race and ethnicity related area, it can be a very hot topic. What we talk about. There are different terms for it, but some people use the term standard American English, as opposed to African American English is a huge topic in linguistics. For the listeners who might have known this by other terms, African American English is what back in the 80s and 90s we used to call Ebonics. But it's the idea, languages evolve even just within a given state or a different area. We develop different dialects, and there's a linguistic phrase, the difference between a dialect and a language is that a language has an army and a navy. So what becomes the powerful folks, that becomes the standard English. Like that is what is quote unquote correct. But for people who study linguistics, African American English or Hawaiian Pidgin, for instance, to go to my family, are just as valid as languages. They have their particular ways of grammar, their ways of using words that are correct. They're consistent across people in many ways in the culture that makes them valid languages, but they aren't treated as a capital L language the way standard American English is.
Can you just say that again? Language, the difference between language and what was the other?
A dialect and a language.
Language has a
language has an army and a navy. So it is the people in power because linguistically, as far as how people are using it, and you're looking at grammar and all those things, they're equally valid.
Right.
It's just we hold one up because it is the language, the dialect, really, of the people who are more powerful.
Power. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Man, I should
You know,
take some notes.
well, actually, you can listen back, and you know Franzo.
Yes.
So Franzo, his a friend of ours here in Madison, his whole background is in linguistics, and I learned actually a lot of this from him. And yeah, but so sorry, I took us on a path, but we were trying. Thinking about composition and standard American English and the way people learn to communicate. How do race and these sorts of things show up in that kind of work that you do?
Well, I mean, when we think about and we talk about this, especially. And I can't speak for this group, but we, on most college campuses now, they have the writing center.
Sure.
So we encourage students to go and work with the writing center because on their assignments, and it's just there's no such thing as a perfect for a strap, blah blah blah.
Right.
But one of the conversations that they have in the writing center is like, how do we respect someone's dialect and how that is evident in their writing.
Yeah.
And then, we have these arguments, we go back and forth, but, standard, white, now, standard, they have the Army and the Navy, the Air Force.
Yeah.
So but also think about it in terms of and this is just my opinion, of working with youth of color and helping them become confident writers, whether it's in the workplace or for the academy or whatever their goals are, is to have ownership of their voice and of their dialect, but also be aware that, okay, I'm going to be in this environment where I'm going to be expected to take on the language of power. Yep. And to me, there is power in being able to move back and forth.
Yes.
Because sometimes I worry, maybe this is just my age now, I worry that if we're like, no, let so-and-so write in their dialect and da-da-da, but then how's that going to look? Because there's still, even though we are enlightened, but there are people outside of our world who are going to be like, this person can write. Did you read this sentence? How are we going to hire this person?
Right.
Yep. But I'd much rather have them to be armed with the skills to I know everybody uses the code switch, but not a but. Let's go. But yes.
And you want to set them up for success.
For success. And this is why we got into this whole thing of what is standard? Who decides? And I'm not so worried about what is and who decides. But if this is what's going to get your foot in the door and get you that job so you can have family sustaining wages, then let's own it, let's master it so that you can go on with your life.
Yeah. I sit in that space a lot because I'm really big about how do we empower, because I think academia in particular has a very colonized white standard of how to speak, how to act, how to dress, how to, hold yourself, all of these things.
Right.
And I think a lot of marginalized youth, students, folks come in through academia, and in order to be successful, they have to let go of so much of who they are or where they come from, or in order to fit and assimilate to this.
Right.
And so there's my hope or my goal is, how do I teach folks to retain who you are, retain where you come from, retain your culture, while also being equipped with the skills to navigate systems that have not yet changed, right? And so I think my hope and my goal is to say, I want to empower you to be able to go into the system and to change it so that we can recognize these things. And I also want to give you the tools to be able to do it so that you can be heard. Right. And it's a hard place, I think, for me to sit in, because I'm like, no, I want you to be able to just to be you and do it how you want to do it and empower you totally to be there. And that's my heart. That's my belief. And our systems are not set up for it yet. And I believe that at some point we'll get better, and that get these younger, like Gen Z and their Gen Alpha, like they're not gonna stand by and let us continue to keep things the way that they are. But until we get there, I don't want you to go into the system and get eaten up and chewed, and not get your foot in the door, not be able to be successful. And I think that like being equipped with both, being able to hold true to who you are, hold true to your background, hold true to your authentic self, and know how to translate and know how to do that, and know how to also find ways of pushing back while holding true to who you are is how we can make that change. But doing it and telling folks like you can't. You can't. You either don't know standard or only ever do standard. Is missing both. Is missing the both and in order for us to really be able to honor somebody and allow them to be all of who they are, is to equip them with how to navigate the systems as they are, while also empowering them to maintain and be proud of who they are and where they come from too.
One of the things I do in the classroom, along that same line, I also let, especially young kids of color, know how much their language, their dialect is already being woven throughout the main or the dominant society. Like you just turn on the news and now you hear the newscaster like, there was drama.
Right.
And I mean, like 10 years ago, there was no that word, that phrasing did not exist. And it's just, just how, I said, like, don't worry. Some of the things you say now, I'm already hearing. Like, it took me a while to bet, and I was like, bet. Yes. Oh, okay, got it. And now I'm seeing it now, in in mainstream media, like
100%.
So I just remind them, like, look, don't worry, because it's what you're saying is the phrases that you use is gonna make its way into the mainstream.
Which to me is a whole other area of like talking about. This is a whole can of worms that we don't have to get into, but is this other piece of dominant culture taking on Black culture as the epitome of cool, from language to street, to style, to hair, to like all of the things, to music that, I think that, the Black folks and our community has been, reprimanded, demonized, whatever, for, or seen as that it's not standard, or that's not, proper, then to take it. And then now this is cool. If you are part of the majority culture, you can do this, and that's cool. Like you've got swag, but like you, or as the Gen Z likes to say, Riz, you got the Riz. And I'm sure I'm not saying it correctly, but Riz, but for a Black person who started it or is doing this, like all like. We were said that was wrong, or like, don't wear your pants like that, don't talk like that. And now it's in mainstream media. And this is the epitome of cool, is Black standard. Vernacular is Black standard dress, Black standard ideas of beauty, which we talked about last episode was about standards of beauty. But
Well, it's interesting because I see that in here in this town, this majority white town, that every now and then I will come across a white male who I have to turn and look, because I'm thinking they're speaking in that Black English vernacular. And I would get some papers and I'd be like, now, where are you from? What's my town? What is this? Hey, we don't need to perform this. Remember,
Yeah.
We'll around a little bit longer, but So back to writing though. Sorry. I mean, it's just I enjoy the teaching of writing. It's hard, and it's again just trying to get students to be confident and comfortable writers. So that they can, go out and get that job and be a part of the, the society, culture, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, be equipped with that, and then also feel confident that they can navigate both ends.
Especially my Black and brown students. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for doing that work.
It's good work.
Good works.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I, just reflecting on what you're saying, like when you were asked to go and speak about your research, I think that I understand that, it was on MLK Day and how that would be like, whoa. But at the same time, I feel that you should relish that, have that, and enjoy that opportunity. But it's difficult. It's difficult. It's difficult for all of us because it's just, if it was not worthwhile, it would not be difficult.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, and, just having these conversations is so like, you're just tired. Like, sometimes we were talking about this earlier and reminded me of my friend who would say, I don't feel like going out today. I don't feel like being Black today. I just want to stay home.
Yeah.
I just want to just like, and I'm like, I know, I feel you.
Yeah, I feel you.
Just like, okay, stay home, child.
I'm just going to stay home. I'm just going to stay home. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we want to start with story time?
Yeah. So, as we know, we always like to have stories. Sometimes it's related to our topic and sometimes it's not. And usually a more negative story and a more positive one. And so in talking about this, when we were talking about kind of academia and things like that. And, we had a time just post George Floyd, in an institution that I was working with. And, and I truly believe, and I say this regularly, in the positive intent of the institution, of the people involved. And it was just a time, and it's a predominantly white space, just post George Floyd, in the middle of the pandemic, particularly Black folks. There's not a whole lot of us in the Portland metro area. There were about 15 of us that were faculty, staff, otherwise, total. And we met and we were just talking like, man, we really need some more support. We need to be better about recruitment and retention. Right. We need to do these things. We want to be part of supporting us moving forward in that way. Right. And in the midst of that, the organization, the institution that we were part of, put out this diversity plan for everybody, which is great. I'm here for us saying like, we need to be addressing things. We need to look at this. We need
state
to
our values.
It's part of a value. I support this idea.
Right.
And then we put it out, and I remember sitting there reading it, and the 15 of us kind of reading it, and we were just like, this has nothing to do with me. This plan, while well-intentioned, is completely majority culture, white-centered. This is about how to make white folks better white people, how to handle, how to support, how to be better allies, and had nothing to do with how to support Black and brown folks or folks that were minoritized in this organization and institution. And in that time when that was like so clearly evident and prominent in the system, in the world, right, post George Floyd, that we're saying like, man, we really need some support. We really need some help. We need some attention. Right. We need some love. We need some money. We need all of these things.
Right.
And yes, it's great to have a diversity plan, but that diversity plan completely missed us. And when we started to talk about it, some of the response that we got was, and we talked about like, when we need more of these things, we need to be better about recruitment. We need more retention. We need more of us so that we can support each other better. We had a response, again, I think well-intentioned, and the response was, well, technically we don't need more Black people. And
do you want to explain to the listeners what that meant?
Yeah, so the reason that the response was technically we don't need more Black people was looking at kind of the ratios of kind of student to faculty and employee ratios. And so technically we were on like the right student to faculty ratio. And
like if the student body is 10% Black, you had 10%.
10%.
Although I think during the institution it was a lot less than that.
might have been a really big number, but essentially, if that's how many of our student population, then we had enough faculty that met that same ratio, where there were other groups, minoritized groups, that didn't technically meet the ratio, and we really need to recruit those folks. And it was just this moment of, again, I love the people that are involved. I have a heart for them. And in that moment, I don't think that they sat and understood what that meant, what they were saying and what they were communicating to us on the heels of a diversity plan that also never mentioned how they were going to support us on the heels of these things that I just sat there going like, what you've now communicated to me is that this isn't about, you don't care about retaining Amber. You don't care about retaining Amber. What you care about is maintaining a number, and that we are a number as faculty and as staff, but also your student. Or is that how you see your students too? Because you're also this diversity plan, not only for me as a faculty, but this was also for the students, which meant you didn't care about retaining your students either. So can we internalize what you have now communicated to all of us in this space? And again, I love so many of these people individually, and continue to have them in my life. And in that moment, especially when there was such heightened a highlight on Black experience. Right. And here's a group of Black people saying, hey, this is what we need. And then to say, actually,
it's technically the accountability, like we were talking about last time or some earlier episode this season. Mistakes will happen, but then when you have members of a community saying, "This is not for us. This does not make us feel wanted, feel belongingness," and then for them to, but technically it's okay. That's them just trying to dismiss your concerns, and that is not doing things well.
Yes, yeah.
I heard a phrase. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but it was on a cable news network.
It's okay if it's too profane, we can add a little bit. We can. But go for it.
Van Johnson, who does a lot of color commentary, lack of a better word. But what I'll say is one of the things that he said, and this is what he said when I was watching. He said, it seems like this is a person who talks about Black people, but not to Black people. And I feel that was your experience.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Again, well-intentioned, but talking about rather than talking to. And that was our whole point, was like, hey, there's not a whole lot of us. It's not actually that hard to talk to all of us at one time. And we want to support the work that we're doing here. We want to support our students. We want to support more folks coming in. Talk to us. Don't create things for us without, or create things about us without including us.
Can I ask my voice? Because I'm just curious. So when this document was presented, was it like a big fanfare and food and drinks, not drinks, food and everybody's there and
it would have been, but it was during the pandemic.
So it was virtual.
It was virtual, but there was a lot of attention brought to it, and a lot of kind of really influential Black organizations and folks that were a part of it, that they were kind of associating with this plan and these things that weren't part of the institution. They were outside. They were doing their own thing. And they were going to be bringing them in. So I think that had it not been during the pandemic, we would have seen a lot more in-person fanfare, but there was a lot of attention brought to it as the ways in which the organization was moving forward. And again, I appreciate the attempt. And my thing was that, like, hey, we've also now said that you've missed us. Here are some ways in which you can support us. And then there was kind of like silence. And that also not only were you communicating something very clearly to us when we were presenting it, but then having silence afterwards further communicated.
We already have the document.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my more negative story.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
Yeah.
So as always, we do one more negative story and then one more positive story. And Bernie, you brought a couple that you wanted to share. So
Negative or positive?
The positive ones.
Let's do the positive story.
Okay, the tool story. Some do that one. That's
Sure,
kind of
go for
positive. So this is somewhat dated because no one says this anymore, but it's
some spaces.
right. Well, they're like, what's this? I was teaching a class of students in the automotive program, and they're, and I think we were in the lab doing some work, and then by lab I mean we're like in the lab where they were working on cars and stuff. And again, I like to take the students in the lab and incorporate writing as part of what they're going to do. So the point of the story is the student was, had this tool in his hand, and the student goes, this tool is so gay. And I was like, oh, here we go. And before I could get into like my mode where I was going to like, let's talk about what do you mean, another student said, well, what do you mean? Explain to me, why is that tool gay? What did that tool do to you?
Right.
Like, and it was just, for me, it was so empowering and just great because I didn't have to jump in and be like, and not that
peer-to-peer correction.
Yeah.
But it was that peer-to-peer correction, and to see this guy like, and then how the whole class kind of like turned on him just for that one brief moment, saying like, yeah, that was really stupid. What the hell do you mean? And like, sorry, I didn't mean to use profanity, but just it was, to me, that was so empowering and just like, in that space of like all males, predominantly white, and I'm assuming predominantly straight, but again, who knows? That they were able to, self-correct that student and challenge his thinking.
Hope for the future, kids these days, or younger people.
Yeah,
these days.
it was
hopefully.
I just, I always think of that story because it was just like, it was just nice to know that was.
And that there was that group. Yeah, the group correction, not just the one. There was one person that stepped out and said something, but then the rest of the group kind of were like,
it was. Just,
we're better than this. What are you talking? What are you talking about? Like, let's move forward. Let's move past this. Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. And then I not remember the others.
You were going to talk about your friend Brian.
Oh, yes.
He's a great ally.
I think that I have a friend in the community here, a white gay male, but also what I admire about this person is that he is aware of the space that he occupies as a white male who identifies as gay and is comfortable in giving up that position of power and is always on the, this is so cliche, but on the ready to be an ally to communities of color. Yeah. But also I admire him because he is acutely aware of the space he occupies and will challenge others to think about, especially other white identifying males, to think about, all right, what are you saying here? Are you thinking about how this is going to be perceived? And we'll question them. And I think he can, because this speaks to what we were saying earlier, he can because he looks like them.
Right.
And can say, whoa, what are you saying here?
Yeah. Whereas he's got a lot more latitude to call,
Whereas
him out.
if we were to say the same thing, would it be like, wait, what?
Right.
You're
trying to shame me. You're trying to make me feel bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Trying to get something for yourself.
Or you're trying to get something for yourself. Exactly.
So props to you, Brian.
Thank you for being a good ally.
Yeah, no kidding.
And a good friend.
And a good friend.
I have a friend named Rosie, and we had several conversations, and she's talked to me several times about like, well, I feel bad about like, I don't want to step into power because there are other people. And she's always been very intentional about like, I don't want to take a position of leadership or this because I don't want to take it from somebody else. So she's always so acutely aware of the position of power that she does hold and trying to intentionally create space for other people to step in. Right. And I think a lot of our conversations have been like, how do you do that in a way that does actually create pathways for who you're wanting to step in, and not just another person who maybe is not as mindful and thoughtful as you are in stepping into those spaces. But yeah, it's huge. That's really great.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, it's uncomfortable at times.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we also we have kind of viewer questions and things like that we always ask. So my question for you, Bernie, is what about, so you're Black and gay.
Right.
What about both and, as I like to say. What about that intersection of being Black and gay?
Amber, you're embarrassing me just because I invited a Black gay man, you gotta ask him about, gosh, isn't that tokenism?
I mean, so not tokenism, but
you weren't elected by all of Black gay
men to speak on behalf.
But you do have, unique experiences. And how do you see them? What are some things that come to mind? What would you like to share with us and our listeners?
So I think, since we've been talking a lot about the academy and the classroom, I think that as a Black gay man, what students see and what I think of first is that I'm this Black body in this space. And I'm also very aware of this Black body because I will amp it up if I need to have some classroom management, I will use my Black body maleness. And I'm also very aware though that it's not the same for Black women or Black and brown women in the classroom.
Right.
So I want to acknowledge that first because that is, it's a privilege and a power that I have just by the fact of being a Black man in the classroom and with these students. Now, when it comes to my sexuality and how I identify in terms of being a Black gay man, I bring it up when I feel I can and when I feel that appropriate is not the right word, but when it's the time to do it.
Relevant.
Yeah.
When it's relevant. Because, I have some white gay friends who are like, you should be in the classroom day one. Like, I'm a gay man. I'm like, that is your body and your space. But I need to negotiate my Blackness first with this room of white students.
Yeah.
And in particular, like white male students, because I'm teaching a lot of students in some of our like automotive and diesel and things like that. Right. So I have to, I'm acutely aware of that. And I'm not, it's not like I'm placing my sexuality in second place. It's just that I've got to negotiate.
There are things you can choose to disclose, and there are things that you have no choice over. And a physical appearance-related identity like Blackness, you can't choose to just don't let your next class of students know that you're Black.
Right. When you're navigating perceptions of Black males and what that means, and also, harkening back to earlier when we were talking about Black culture. Yeah. There's also a lot of internal and community things around, being queer, being gay within Blackness, especially Black men. Yeah. And so not only are you navigating, the space with your students, but also kind of these other perceptions of Black men and what Black men and being Black and gay at the same time within our community as well as outside of the community as well.
Right. That said, though, it's not that I am like, I think you said relevance, but I also, as a Black gay man, and I feel that I am relevant in my, who I love is also relevant. And it's just, it's something that I think as a Black gay man, it's something that I balance every day, especially in the classroom. Because, I guess I in my office, I have all the markers, the pride, this, that, and the other, and the colors and what have you. And, if a student is having some issues, then we'll self-disclose, especially if that student identifies as, gay or bi, gay or whatever, then, in order to help that student, you know, I will share my experiences as a Black gay man and growing up as a Black gay man and now transitioning to being an older Black gay man, which is, you know,
another intersection.
Right.
Another, yeah, there's a whole different. So I guess the answer to your question, like, I feel like you're like, what is it like? It's a journey. It's a learning. You're always continually learning about yourself. Because like even earlier today, I was thinking about this and I had this answer, but then as we had our conversation, I realized there's just so many things that are impacting our identity.
Yeah.
And that, you know, what is it? You know, our identity is not, it's, you know,
In
not
flux.
It's in
continuous-
flux, yeah.
We're constantly defining and redefining and re-understanding ourselves.
Because 20-year-old
Yeah.
Black gay Bernie is totally different than, you know, 61-year-old Black gay Bernie.
Right.
You know?
And if you were 20 years old today, it's a different
I was
world.
gonna say,
Oh, my Lord, yes.
The world is the context, time, and
Right.
generations are different. And
Yeah.
so understanding yourself in all of those times and spaces is totally different.
Although I did feel it was cooler to be gay in the 80s.
Well, I definitely.
That's fair. I can appreciate that.
There's a lot of,
But even just from the early 2000s to like when I was coming out, there was no one out in any of my high schools. There was nothing.
Yeah.
Now kids are coming out at 12. And
Right.
it's no big deal. It's very different.
Yes, very different.
But it's interesting because now as I reflect back, I remember my mom, you know, who was also a teacher, had a friend and his name was Mr. Carroll. I knew that he was different, but it just, because, you know, no one talked about it.
Right.
You know, just this was not discussed. But, you know, he carried a purse and, you know, with these big hats and everything. And even when I was coming to terms with my sexuality, it's still, you know, I kind of just had to go and learn on my own, you know. And I think today, there's a lot, you know, there's just more support and even more in some families, not all.
Right.
But yeah.
Culturally speaking.
Yeah, culturally speaking. But yeah, it's a challenge in the classroom at times.
Yeah.
But it's not like, it's like we said, it's just, you know, we're balancing, spinning plates at times.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank
thank
you
you.
for that. I appreciate that.
I could say more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know if I like that answer because but also there's part, I'm like in turmoil right now because I'm thinking like the audience is like, oh, he should be like, hell yeah. Black and gay, you know, angry.
We all get to determine those things for ourselves.
Yeah.
When we are lucky enough to have that privilege for some identities, and not
Good point.
others.
Good point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, well, and you know,
Absolutely.
we'll just have to have you back, and you can share more of your answers next time.
Yes, more insights. Yes, I
Yeah.
love it. I love
Right.
it. So, Will, can you bring us home with our habit-breaking skill?
Yes.
Oh.
And we have had just so many great conversations
today.
It's going to be an extra long episode, but I'm going to, this is an important one, so I'm going to give it its due, but it can
What, are we
be
longer
somewhat
than
brief.
The normal?
Delightfully so.
Oh.
Yes. All right, so this is from the habit breaking model, which our listeners know well. One of the key things we emphasize is tools, how we kind of develop better habits that help us break bias. But one of the things we have to keep in mind when learning about that stuff is that there are things people think would be a good idea that actually backfire. Things that people are like, if I'm trying to treat people equitably, trying to fight bias, this is something I should do. But really, science and experience say not a good way to go. And so it's one of those skills today, something that we want to encourage people to not do. And that's don't ignore group statuses. So the way this often plays out, you hear someone who says, well, I just don't see race.
Right.
Oh, Lord.
I don't see color.
I don't see
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of us want to help, but we just have blind spots when it comes to this stuff. I mean, when I was growing up, we were told the goal was to not see race.
Okay, see, I don't know who started telling white people that. I'm assuming it was other white people, but you shouldn't ignore race. You should be aware of how being black affects our daily lives.
Colorblind.
Or they think, you know, if I want to avoid bias, well, I just won't see that. I just won't think about that aspect of someone. The reality is, if you are a sighted person, your eyes are going to pick up on cues to color and tone. It's going to send a signal to your brain. It's going to activate ideas about race, including stereotypes, biases, all these kinds of things we talk about. And just saying, oh, I just don't see it, it doesn't really work.
Right.
It's also not necessarily desirable. Not true, exactly. Not necessarily desirable. So as we talked a bit about today, people's identities, for many people, they're an important part of who they are, and they derive esteem from that. And if that's something that they care about in themselves, and you say, oh, I just don't see that about you, be insulting or demeaning to someone.
Right.
And as with all these kind of don'ts skills that we talk about, things that we know backfire, this also backfires. Research consistently shows that when white folks adopt this kind of perspective, like in their techniques or their ideas about how to be unbiased is, oh, I just don't see race, I just try to ignore race. They actually show more bias rather than less. And people of color actually see them as more biased.
Right.
And this also applies for things like sexual orientation, gender, and so on. Just trying to ignore something isn't a good way to avoid or overcome bias. We're much better served by putting it on the table, saying, yep, race is a part of what goes on. It activates things in my brain that might lead to biases. And I need to try to understand that. How would this bias influence my judgment, my behavior towards this person? And then put into practice some of the effective tools that we talk about in other episodes. Effective tools that help reduce bias, make sure that those biases don't influence our behavior.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and I think about this as the term is called dynamic sizing, right? Which is one, acknowledging the group status, right? We have to know some things about group status and be able to acknowledge, recognize that, because it's important, often very important to people. And the flip of that is also not assuming one's identity based on what they look like, or two, how tied they are to my understanding or concept of what that is, what it means to be Black, or what it is, or what those stereotypes are. Right. So it's both and, again, both and.
Talk about diverse joy bingo. Like one of the squares is saying both and.
Both and.
It's so true, though.
Right? Like not ignoring the group status. You have to acknowledge it, be able to see it, recognize it, and also not assuming anything about that person, right? Based on what I'm look at, or even how they say they identify. That doesn't necessarily mean I know what that means to you, right? And that's why our whole conversation today, what does it mean for you to be Black? What does it mean for Bernie to be Black and gay? Right. And it may not be the same as somebody else that I know that identifies as Black and gay and in their context. And also I can acknowledge and say, like, you are a Black man and you navigate the world as a Black man, and that means something to you, whatever that looks like.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How often or have you two faced that kind of I don't see color? Like how often have people said that to you? Or if you're comfortable sharing any experiences related to that.
Not so much anymore, especially
maybe people are learning that's not a good way to go.
George Floyd with
Oh, good.
there was some reckoning did take place. But prior to that,
I was gonna say you hear it a little bit less now. Post, but that's post George Floyd is only a few years. And so hearing colorblind, or I'm just not gonna do that, or I just treat everybody like I want to be treated. Well, that's the idea of the golden rule, and like the golden rule actually is not that helpful, because you're centering yourself, your privilege, your experience of the world, and not theirs, right? Exactly. And the platinum rule is to treat people how they want to be treated, not how I want to be treated, right? But so I think that idea, like, and again, the intention behind it was, I think, a positive one, which was like, I don't want to treat people differently based on their skin color. But when you do that, you actually cause erasure, and you don't actually acknowledge people for who they are, and how difficult or easy or different things, how that unique experience places them in time and place, right? To ignore me as a Black woman during the George Floyd era is to completely miss something that's likely very impactful for me. Again, not everybody, not every Black person experienced the George Floyd era like the same way. But to say nothing, or not to say like that might be something that's going to impact me.
To not even consider it.
Not even
completely
consider
ignoring
it.
that maybe
Ignoring that, right? Is to ignore something that could very well be something really, really important.
Well, I'm glad that maybe there's a cultural shift happening where people have kind of recognized that. When I go around and give these trainings, I often hear kind of after the section where I talk about this, someone say something along the lines of, well, one, that happening to them, or in like hiring kinds of situations. There was this one company where they had some kind of consultant come in about hiring and essentially told them that's what they should be doing. You should be completely ignoring any of that, even though we know it shows up, people infer it from names. It's going to be there. And if we're not even thinking about it, if we're trying to push it out of our minds, actually that's where bias thrives. That's where it makes bias more likely.
Yes. Yep. And that's a whole other can of worms that we won't get into today, but it makes me think of like, affirmative action, and especially in academia, which is now like not something we can't consider race in our in when we're doing admissions applications and things like that. And that's a whole other thing I won't get into right now.
We have our past guest and future guest, Nikki Vandermeulen,
who's
a lawyer, is going to come and talk specifically about legalities of all of that kind of stuff. So
excellent. So we can talk about
good legal analysis from one of our dear friends.
Yeah.
I do have a question for the two of you, though. Sure. And this is based on our conversation. I know that we're running out of time, but because I feel like it's here. It's permeating all of this. Like I took a class in grad school. It was on whiteness studies, and we focused on. And when I could, I used to teach a composition class. It was a research writing class, and they would do research. And I say, okay, the question is, what does it mean to be white? And it was really fascinating. Again, predominantly white. And they're like, what do you mean?
What do you mean? Yeah.
What? And I'm like, no, ask some family members, ask friends. And then they would come back and just be like, because it kind of goes back to this color blindness.
Right.
These, small town rural kids, that were raised in this, like we don't talk about race.
Right. Well, and I also think that people that are from the majority culture just don't think about it because they don't have to. And because they don't have to, whether you're from a rural space or not.
It's the idea of the white default.
It's the default.
Right. But last thing, but I am noticing though that we are seeing change because now all of a sudden, I'll hear people say, it was just this old white guy who was da-da-da-da. And I would never have heard that years ago. And everyone was like, what white guy? I know, right?
Right.
But there is a sense that, there is a difference. There are people, I feel like maybe perhaps the younger generation is starting to realize like, okay, the live experience is different.
Yeah, it's the recognizing the privilege and like back to your positive story, your friend Brian, who recognizes this is a position I hold and it's a part of the reality of how people perceive me, how they respond to me, and the idea of kind of the white as default and only talking about whiteness when we're talking about a deviation from it does a disservice on that level because we're not acknowledging those things. That's how I think about it.
Well, it reminds me of, and it's an article on privilege really, but it's going back to white as default is Peggy McIntosh.
1989,
The Invisible Knapsack.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Where she goes through and it was like, here are all of the things I don't have to think about because of the body that I embody, right? That I walk through every day. And it is that time. And I've recommended it. I mean, I have my students read it all the time. But like, if you're struggling with white privilege or you're struggling with what does it mean to be white or what does it mean to navigate the world, this is a really great, it was even eye-opening for me as a Black person in a predominantly white space. Like, oh, right. There are like, these are all the things I do think about every day. You don't think about this? What do you mean? You don't have to think about that. This is it was eye-opening for me.
And it's an excellent example of something we talked about in our previous episode, which is the kind of I statements. This was a white person reflecting on herself. She's like, for me, these are considerations. And that's one of the best ways we can teach other people. Absolutely. Not saying, well, what you should say, what you should write, or what you should do. What I think when I hear this, what I experience, that kind of of looking to your own behavior first, not in terms of being self-centered, but in terms of how you're trying to be better is a great way to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I didn't mean to bring up the whole whiteness thing.
No,
again.
No,
Sorry.
that's all
we
right.
love it.
It's great. It's great.
So to wrap us up, though, we always end with this kind of joyful media recommendation, and you had one to chat about. I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed.
No, it's
We all thought it was a great idea.
It's a great idea. Yeah,
Okay.
I love it.
So what's media that you can just put on and brings you joy?
Okay, if I'm going to media that brings me joy because of it really speaks to the diversity in this country, and I know there's an international. House Hunters.
House
Hunters.
And I know everyone's like, wait, what? But it's a joy to watch that show because, like living in the United States, you never know what you're going to encounter in terms of people. So on one episode, it could be a gay couple, a lesbian couple, a multiracial couple, or just a single race couple. But people, what it speaks to me and the joy is that it's about creating a sense of home.
And that's a very intimate moment in someone's life.
Right. And how home is so important to all of us. And even though it's kind of staged, but the conversations that the folk have,
what they're looking for to what's going to help them create a sense of belonging and sense of home and where they are, whether it's why they're moving and what, or they need a bigger space or whatever it is. You get to this opportunity to hear values, and you get to hear and see just real people. Yeah. Like this, it is, I'm sure there's casting calls and stuff, but it's not as staged as most things. It seems like regular people. Yeah, it's not so scripted. It's like, you see these regular people just living out this part of their life.
Exactly.
And I think going back
Thank
to
you
skills.
for supporting me on that.
Oh, I love it.
I
was like,
wait,
what?
And when we think of kind of skills we want people to develop, empathy is such a huge one.
Yes.
And when you're seeing these people's real lives, their concerns, how couples interact with each other, what they're thinking about with their kids, that's a natural way to kind of develop and accentuate empathy for people who might be different from you or similar in various ways. And that kind of emotional work is so important and scientifically shown to be one of the best ways to work against biases. If it's a white viewer seeing this black family and saying, oh, they have the same kind of concerns I do. They're worried about their kids' schools the way I like. They find that connection, and then that's an education that people get, an emotional education that helps with these kinds of things. So I think it's great, and it's just entertaining. Yes, in addition.
Absolutely.
And as soon as we said it, Eric Roman's not on mic this episode, but he was like, "Oh yes, I love House Hunters too."
Yeah.
So,
and there's so many versions of it too, all over international beach, House Hunters everywhere.
So you'll never run out of something.
You'll never run out. That's for sure.
All right. So House Hunters, check it out. It brings Bernie joy, brings Amber joy, and Roman joy. I'm sure I've seen it. I haven't watched it, but
oh my God,
I gotta watch it.
Yeah.
All right. I'm Dr. William Cox.
And I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
And our guest today,
Bernie Hose.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Binding with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts or at diversejoy.com. Also follow us on the socials at Diverse Joy on most social media platforms. If you enjoyed the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews or recommending it personally. Talking with other people is the number one way that more people reach podcasts, or that podcasts reach more people, excuse me. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work. Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now, go find your joy.
Bye.
Bye. Woo. was so great. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you for coming.
That was amazing.
Cry a little bit.
Aw.